Hello. This sermon audio is a ministry of the Town Church in Fort Collins, Colorado. If you would like to learn more about us, how to connect, or how to support us, go to our website, thetownchurch.org. While listening to the Bible preached is a healthy part of our spiritual formation, it is not the whole picture. So if you aren't a part of a local church, we encourage you to prayerfully commit to a local body of believers where you live. We're glad you can join us, and we hope God uses the following sermon to reveal more of His glory to you.
Good morning. You all got really quiet, and that's good during a prayer, but it's good to be with you all this morning. My name is Vince. I am one of the elders here on staff as one of the pastors as well. It's good to see so many of you that I know and some faces that I don't know. So if you're new with us, I'd love to meet you at some point. We are going to look at God's Word together this morning. And you may be here this morning as someone who's like, I get it, I know the story, I've heard the story, let's move on. I really do want to help us understand some things about this celebration together, some things that may hit our hearts as well. And so want to walk us through that together. We have been working through the book of 1 Corinthians as a church, so we'll pick that back up next week, but this morning we're going to be in the book of John, and so I'll point your attention to that. I'll have it on the screen. If you didn't bring a Bible, that's fine. Here's where I'm going to start, though. Even though it may look like, somebody asked me earlier, a couple of people have asked me if this is a Canadian tuxedo that I'm wearing. Even though it may look like that, I'll tell you, I grew up in Missouri, and that's okay. Maybe you grew up somewhere that you wouldn't like to mention. So I grew up in Missouri, and does anybody know the state motto for Missouri? The Show Me State. Right? That is the state motto. If you've been there, or like me, if you grew up there, you begin to see that motto on everything around the state. So you drive in, that sign, by the way, is not as cool as our Colorado sign, but you see it there, you see it on license plates, you see it all over the state. And there are several stories about how did that motto get started. And where people have mostly landed on how that got started is this. Over 100 years ago, there was a congressman by the name of Willard Duncan Vandiver, which is an amazing name. New parents, if you're looking for names. William Duncan Vandiver was his name. And this is what he looked like. So kids, if your dad does not look like that, encourage him to look like that. It's an amazing look that he's got going on. And here's what Willard Duncan Vandiver said in a naval banquet speech in 1899. He says, "I come from a state that raises corn and cotton and cockleburrs." If you're from Missouri, you know what those are. "And Democrats. And frothy eloquence neither convinces nor satisfies me. I am from Missouri. You have got to show me." And so many people have come to this conclusion that that's where that motto has come from. In a sense, what Willard Duncan Vandiver is saying is, I come from a state that is simple. It's simple and it's clear, and flowery language is not going to convince me of anything. I need to see it. The way that you say it is not going to convince me. I need to see it. I need you to show me. You have to prove your case to me. I'll doubt everything until I see otherwise. Now, whether you're from Missouri or not, we all have a little bit of that in us, don't we? Where we want to see it. You're going to have to prove that to me. If you're going to say something that's out there, you're going to have to prove that to me that that's actually the case. You're going to have to show me that that is the case. So here's an example. If I were to tell you, you all were sitting in here, you were singing, I got to hear it, it was beautiful, and let's say I was outside cleaning up on my last 40th donut that I was eating, and I said to you, hey, I was just outside, I noticed over toward the west, the entire front range was on fire, and ash had begun to fall, and our cars are now covered in a thin layer of ash. If I came in here and said that, many of you would be like, I don't know. Based on we're in Colorado, so it's possible, but based on the last couple days with the temperature and the rain and the snow, I doubt that that's the case. You'd probably doubt that. But let's say you grab someone who you trust quite a bit, and you send them out there, hey, go check and see the validity of what Vince is saying. And they run out and they come back and they say, yeah, in fact, he's right. There's a fine layer of ash over everything. You would say, okay, I kind of trust this person more than I trust Vince. Maybe okay. But there's probably something still in you that says, but I'm going to have to wait until the gathering's over to see if that's really true. We want to see it. We want to see that proof is there. We want to understand that, yep, I see it and I believe it because I see it. We have that in us. When it comes to belief in God, I think the same kind of things hold true. Yeah, we believe in God, we can say that, but do we truly believe that he is who he says he is, that he can do the things he says he does? We come to a weekend like this, specifically a weekend like this, where we're celebrating what God has done through his son. And there can be some doubts in us. Can we just phrase that, or say that right now? There can be some doubts even among us this morning. And in fact, I'd like to just very generally categorize who we have in the room. And I think I'll just narrow it down to two categories. And here are the categories. I think there's one group of people in the room that would say, I'm a Christian. That's who I am. Maybe you've been a Christian for a while. You know the events surrounding Easter. You would say, that's me. I believe what God has done and what he's done through his son. But there's still something beating around in you that thinks, but I'm not sure what is really going on, and I'm not sure how that applies to my life today. And so there's a little bit of doubt, this leaning toward, we'll see. Sorry if that doesn't classify you, but I think that's a category. I think the other category of people in the room is this, likely those who doubt quite a bit about what God has done, is doing, says he has done, the events surrounding Easter. There's a lot of doubt surrounding that. Doubting, maybe you're in a place where you're doubting your need for a belief in Jesus, or doubting that Jesus exists at all. And so because of that, you doubt the things that surround this holiday. I doubt that if Jesus exists at all, if he died, and if he did die, that he rose from the dead. And so I think there's a couple different categories of people in the room. And I want to put it out there. I think we all struggle with doubt at times. We want to see it, to believe it. We want answers to hard questions. We want proof that what we're experiencing is actually a part of God's plan in our lives right now. We want to see it. We're not alone in that. In fact, even in the Bible, there's a man who walked with Jesus, who was in this place, walked with him for a number of years, was a friend of his, who had to see it to believe it. A man by the name of Thomas. Maybe Thomas was from Missouri. If he was probably called Tommy or something. Thomas is the man. We see him throughout the story of the life of Jesus. In fact, this story, maybe for you, it's a familiar story. You know the story of Jesus. You know the Christmas story that Jesus came as a baby, that he lived on this earth for some 30 years, and that he gathered a group of 12 followers, 12 friends around him. And we know that outside of that group, generally speaking, there are a lot of people who really hated Jesus and the claims that he made about being God and about being the Messiah. And some of us may even know that, yep, that Jesus, who lived here for about 30 years or so, predicted that one day he was going to die. And so we would land in that category and say, yeah, I know that. And many of us would know that prediction was true and that he did die. And we were here on Friday and we recognize that. And we walked through those events in the Gospel of John and the Gospel of Matthew. And we saw those events play out. And we read about the death of Jesus in John 19, and that he was brutally beaten and he was spit upon and that he was hung on a cross, nailed to a cross. And so that prediction for him was fulfilled. And maybe less known than that is that Jesus predicted his own resurrection. That, yeah, he died a brutal death, and 3 days later he rose from the dead. And he predicted that that was going to happen. So let's put ourselves, if we can, in the sandals of his followers. Someone like Thomas. If someone came in to you, you're one of his followers, one of those 12, and said to you, hey, I saw you 3 days ago. We're on Sunday, Easter morning, that Sunday. I saw you 3 days ago. You were there when they killed Jesus, right? I saw you there. Yeah, okay, I was there. Well, you're not going to believe this, but I saw him across the parking lot. I think he was walking into Chipotle. Now, if you heard that, you would think, okay, you're crazy. It could not have been Jesus. And here's why it could not have been Jesus, because dead people stay dead. And yeah, he talked about something about him coming back, but we've got some doubts about that now. And it's not really acknowledging something that there's a doubt there. It's acknowledging a reality. Dead people stay dead. Jesus cannot be alive. So that's maybe where we would land if we're one of his 12 followers who had walked with him through that whole thing. But we get to John chapter 20, and we meet a woman by the name of Mary who stood in front of the empty tomb and wept. She cried when she looked in because Jesus' body was not there. And when she cried, if you know the story, when she cried, what happened? Jesus approached her and asked her why she was crying. And when she heard the voice of Jesus, she recognized at that moment that it was Jesus. And Jesus says to her, hey, you need to go tell the disciples, tell my followers what has happened. And so Mary runs to the disciples and she says, I've seen the Lord. But still at this point, the disciples have got to be in some shock, right? They're not sure what's going on. Their leader, the one they've been following, has been killed. They put him in a tomb. They know where it is. Probably not believing Mary and the things that she's come to tell them. One of their best friends has been killed. I think sometimes in this story, we separate ourselves from the reality of what was going on. This is a best friend of theirs, and he has been killed. There's still shock there. And I know many of you have experienced the loss of a loved one even recently. And you've walked through that tragedy. And you've experienced everything that goes along with that. And one of the things that you've probably recognized is that there's a good amount of disbelief in what has gone on. Has this really happened? Has what I'm waking up to every morning a reality? You sort of shake your head, pinch yourself, and is this a reality? Every day you sort of start the day living in this fog. What in the world has happened? If you've been there, you probably understand what the disciples are walking through and can imagine that there's a lot of shock, a lot of disbelief for them. Now, that same evening, when Mary comes to the disciples and says, I've seen the Lord, that Sunday evening, the disciples were hiding out in a house with the door locked behind them in fear that the same Jews who had killed Jesus would be after them. They were in a house and we're told that Jesus came and stood among them. And he says to them, peace be with you. I think that's a humorous thing that we would just recognize. That's funny, that almost anytime we see an angel or Jesus or some God figure approach someone, they always say, peace be with you. And it's probably because they can see the face of the person who's terrified. And so they say, peace be with you. Jesus steps in and says, peace be with you. There's got to be some disbelief among the disciples even in that moment. And so what does Jesus do? He shows them his hands and the holes in his hands and the hole in his side. What's Jesus doing? He's proving to them that it's him. It's really me. So we get to chapter 20, verse 20, and he says, look, you see it. It's right here in my hands and in my side. And after seeing this, we're told the disciples were glad they had seen Jesus. But there's someone who's missing. If you know the story, you know this. Thomas was not there that evening. Thomas wasn't with them when they were approached by Jesus, so the disciples had to go tell him. In verse 24 of chapter 20, it says, "Now Thomas, one of the 12, called the twin, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, 'We've seen the Lord.' But he said to them, 'Unless I see his hands, in his hands the mark of the nails, and place my finger into the mark of the nails, and place my hand into his side, I will,'" what's the word? "Never believe." This isn't maybe I will. He says, "I will never believe." And I don't think any of us would be much different. I think we would be right there with Thomas. Thomas wasn't there when Jesus, do you understand that picture? He wasn't there when Jesus came to them. He shows them the holes in his hands and the hole in his side. Thomas wasn't there. And so they come to him and say, "This is what we've seen." He says, "I'll never believe it until I'm able to touch it." I don't think we'd be much different, saying, "Unless I see some proof, I'm not going to believe." In fact, I would imagine that there are some in the room right now who would be in that category, who would say, "Unless I have some proof that God is really God and that what he said it would happen, then I will never believe." You know, I used to believe maybe this is you, I used to believe this whole Jesus thing was true. I went to church, I read my Bible, I spent some time with others who were doing the same kind of thing. My parents had walked me along in this, they taught me these things, and I believed because at that point it was easy for me to believe. I didn't have any responsibilities, anything I had to grab onto. It was easy for me to believe the things that my parents were telling me I ought to believe. It was all right there. Now, however, things are much different. They've been ripped away from me, and so that list could go on. God doesn't seem to be keeping up his side of the bargain. Or my marriage is a mess, or I just lost my job, or I'm not in the relationship that I wanted, or my health is not great. God keeps stripping things away from me, and I'm not sure this is the same God I once knew. Show me something different, God. Show me. I'll believe it when I see it. Unless I see some proof, I will never believe. Maybe some of you are there. Show me that believing in and following Jesus will actually be a help in my life. Prove to me that anything about Jesus is beneficial for me. You just recognize that. If that's where you are this morning, just recognize that. Are we different than Thomas? So often we look down on, what do we call Thomas? Doubting Thomas. But even that's a negative push, isn't it? That doubting Thomas. As if he's weak for not believing. And I think if we check our own hearts, even our own lives and the ways that we've walked through things, we might find that we're even in a similar place as Thomas. But time moves on, and we're told in verse 26 that 8 days later, so this is a week later, his disciples were inside again, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." He says it again, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands, and put your hand and place it in my side. Do not disbelieve, but believe." Put the whole story together for a second. Jesus approaches the disciples when Thomas is not there, and he shows them the holes in his hands and the hole in his side. The disciples go to Thomas and tell Thomas, "Hey, we've seen Jesus." Thomas says, "I will never believe." Jesus steps in. He's not been there. He hasn't heard these conversations. Jesus steps in and says to Thomas, "Here it is. Put your finger in the holes and your hand in my side." Thomas was asking for proof. Quietly with the disciples, Jesus comes and offers proof. We need that sometimes. Jesus gives him proof. He shows himself to be God, asking for proof. This is for us. Asking for proof from the God of the universe can be a scary endeavor. He may show you that he is God in ways that you're not comfortable him showing that. Ways that may or you may or may not expect or desire. So Jesus steps in and he gives Thomas proof, but more importantly, he calls him to belief. He says, do not disbelieve, or the way I would say it, don't doubt, believe. So what is Jesus calling Thomas to believe? Is he calling Thomas to believe, hey, it's really me, but believe me, buddy, it's really me? Or is he saying, hey, no, physically this happened, you should believe it physically happened, you can see the holes, like anatomically, you can understand how this really happened. Is that what he's asking him to believe? I don't think it is, and I think we get this from looking at the entire life of Thomas. Jesus has claimed all along that he's different. He said this all along to Thomas, and that there's some plan for his life. In fact, we don't know much about Thomas other than what we see of him mentioned in the book of John. And he's only mentioned 3 places. One of those places in John 14 where Jesus is talking to the disciples about belief in God and belief in Jesus. And he tells his disciples, hey, I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm going away to prepare a place for you, a house with many rooms, and I'm going to come back and I'm going to take you there. Jesus is speaking of heaven and what he's going to prepare for them. And then Jesus says, you know the way to where I am going. And our friend Thomas is the only one who responds. And he says, we do not know the way you're going. How can we know the way? Thomas speaks up and says, how do we know the way? Which is a typical response from someone who needs proof. You're going to have to show me. We don't know this. You're going to have to show me what this looks like. How are we to know the way? Do you know what Jesus' response to Thomas is? He says to Thomas, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. It's got to be ringing now in the heart and in the ears of Thomas as he experiences Jesus standing there in chapter 20 with holes in his hands and a hole in his side. Don't doubt. Believe is the call on the life of Thomas. Jesus is calling Thomas to believe that he's the way to the Father. You remember what I said. He's the truth. He's the life. And I know, I'm positive of it, that there are people in the room this morning who are doubting it, and you're not alone. We see it in the life of Thomas, and Jesus is calling you, Jesus is calling me back to his truth. In him alone is life. So if that's where you are this morning, we're glad you're here. We want you to hear these things and want you to understand that Jesus is walking us toward him more and more. In fact, Eric has purchased a bunch of these books, a guided journey through the Gospel of John. They're all on the back counter back there. If this is something that would be of interest to you, it walks through the book of John slowly. You can read through it and understand what's going on here. It calls you in to believe. Or if you have a friend that may be helpful, they're free. Take one. It's a great resource for you. Our desire as a church is that you don't just allow these things to come in because it's Easter, but you allow these things to sink into your heart, that Jesus himself is calling you to believe. Believe that he's alive. We see that interaction with Thomas. The only other interaction we see of Thomas in the Bible is in John chapter 11. Jesus learns that his good friend Lazarus is sick. And not just sick, but Lazarus eventually dies. And Jesus is with his disciples when he gets the news about Lazarus dying, and he says something shocking in chapter 11, verse 14. He says, I'm glad I was not there to help Lazarus when he died, so that what? So that you would believe. That's a wild statement. So that you would believe. I'm glad I wasn't there to help him. And then he says, let's go to him. And who responds to Jesus? Our friend Thomas. He says in verse 16, he says, let us also go that we may die with him. And he's talking about Jesus, not Lazarus. He says, if we're going to follow Jesus, let's follow him into this, whatever is about to happen. Let's follow him there, and we will probably die as we walk with him. Lazarus speaks up. And when they get to the tomb, Thomas speaks up, and when they get to the tomb of Lazarus, what does Jesus say? Thomas is certainly standing around. In verse 25, he says, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live. He will live. Thomas has got to be standing there hearing that. We're going to die because we believe in this guy. And Jesus says, yep, you're going to die, but I am the resurrection and the life. Believe in me. He's calling Thomas to believe. Believe in me, and there's eternal life. Two places we see Jesus interact with Thomas in the book of John before we get to chapter 20, and both places Jesus confronts the doubt of Thomas, calling him to believe. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I am the resurrection. It's got to be ringing in the heart of Thomas as Jesus now stands in front of him in that room after the resurrection. Don't doubt, but believe. Don't doubt, but believe, Thomas. Friends, this is exactly what Jesus would be saying to us as well, and he is. He's saying to us, I'm the only way to the Father, and the reason that I'm the only way is because of my death. I'm able to offer life because of my death on the cross. Jesus is saying the same things to us. I took on your sin and paid the penalty for it. I suffered the consequences of your sin and died your death. But he doesn't end there. He says, I didn't stay dead. I defeated sin and death forever for you. Don't doubt, believe. Who needs to hear that this morning? I've been praying all week that would sink into our heads and our hearts. Don't doubt, believe. And do you know how Thomas responds to Jesus in chapter 20? Don't doubt, believe. Here's what he says. My Lord and my God. That's the very opposite of doubt and disbelief. Doubt and disbelief turn us inward to us being the one who knows the truth, because it's not that. That's craziness. So I know what is true. Thomas does just the opposite. He says, my Lord, the one who is the Lord of my life, the Lord of my heart. And he doesn't just say my Lord, he also says my God. God is the one I worship, my Lord and my God. Thomas is a man whose heart has changed from doubt. He needs to be shown. You got to show it to me, show it to me, show it to me. Jesus keeps calling him to believe, believe, believe. He's only mentioned in a couple places, but in those places he's mentioned, I think this is what we see. We see that God has offered to us a person with whom we can relate. We can relate to a person like Thomas because Thomas says what's on his heart and what's on his mind. He's able to speak what's going through his mind. He says the things we're thinking, but are maybe too embarrassed or ashamed to say. He says, I need to see it to believe it. Show me. And after the resurrection, Jesus does show him. And Thomas's response is, my Lord and my God. What's his response? It's worship. It's worship. He has seen and experienced what God has done through his son. Friends, this morning, that's what we're celebrating. Here's where we close. That's what we're celebrating, that our Lord and God has done exactly what he said he would do. He died to pay the penalty of our sin. He was buried in a tomb. It was shut tight. It was protected by guards. But if that's where the story ends, we are, as Paul says, the most to be pitied. If it all just sort of fizzles out at the death of Jesus, then what are we doing? If Friday night was the end of our time experiencing this weekend, it would be foolish to say, yep, Jesus died, so I guess we all just go home now. But Jesus calls on us to believe, to not doubt. He said he's the way, the truth, and the life. And he's not dead. He's alive. Jesus did exactly what he said he would do. No grave would hold Jesus back from keeping his promises. To the one, spoken to the one who might doubt, to you and to me. Doubt unless Jesus would keep his promises and prove his words, and he did. And so when we say, show me, listen, he has. He has shown us his death on the cross is proof that he conquered sin once and for all, and his resurrection from the dead is proof that he has conquered death once and for all. We have a Lord and God and Savior and King who keeps his promises, who meets us in our doubts, who shows us he is Lord, powerful over sin and death. That's worth celebrating, isn't it? So we've working through the book of 1 Corinthians, and at the end of 1 Corinthians, in this letter that Paul has written, he finishes out with a chapter 15 is all about the resurrection of Jesus and what that means for us. And in that, I think he speaks to some of the doubt that we may experience. We think, well, okay, what's this mean for us? And Paul says, kind of this mic drop of a moment to say that this is over. Death is swallowed up in victory. Oh, death, where is your victory? Oh, death, where's your sting? And he goes on, the sting of death is sin, and the power of sin is the law. But thanks be to God who gives us the victory through our Lord Jesus Christ. We celebrate that today. We can say thanks be to God because he gives us victory. Jesus has conquered sin and death for us. Jesus has risen.